Darkcast Network, indie pods with a dark side.
Hello and welcome back to Fuck That. Today I have a very special guest who has delved into the darkest corners of the human psyche to bring us stories of true crime. She's an acclaimed author, investigative journalist, and a prominent voice in the world of true crime, Aphrodite Jones. Aphrodite, I am thrilled to have you on the show today, especially with the release of your new book, Levi's Eyes, which comes out on September 27th. But before we delve into that, I just wanted to take a moment to get to know the author behind these narratives. Aphrodite, you've had an incredible career thus far, and you've been involved with some of the biggest cases we've seen over the past several years. Can you tell the listeners a bit more about your background?
Sure. And thanks for having me on, Ashley. I do appreciate it. So I started writing true crime books. It's now 30 years ago. And back then, when I was involved in this genre, people would say to me, "Why do you like death? Why do you like this sick, twisted stuff?" And the answer is, I never liked it. I still do not like it. I fell into it because I was teaching at a school in Appalachia at the time. I was a college professor finishing my PhD, and a woman in the mountains was killed by an FBI agent. And to me, I knew I was at the end of the world there in Appalachia, but I was like, where's the news? Where's CNN? Where's anybody? Why aren't they covering this? This is a historical thing. The first time in history that an FBI agent was convicted of homicide. He copped a manslaughter plea. He admitted to killing this girl after they went after him. This woman, I should say. She's not a girl. She was pregnant with his child. In any event, I was so outraged by it. I dedicated the book to her. It's called The FBI Killer. It was my first book. I wound up with an agent. That became a television movie. Patricia Arquette played the woman who was killed. Steven Weber played the killer. And so that was the beginning of a career that I never anticipated I would have, you know?
Absolutely. And can you discuss a little bit about, I think one of the most impressive things about your career is the fact that you've been on national news with both CNN, Fox, and you've covered a lot of really interesting cases. I know Michael Peterson, for those of you that might not be familiar, there was a Netflix show as well as an HBO show called The Staircase about that case, as well as some other major cases like Dennis Rader, BTK, and Scott Peterson. Can you give us a bit of a background on that as well?
Sure. So I started covering big trials with OJ Simpson and, went through the gamut through Casey Anthony. The draw for me in covering a case wasn't necessarily television. I was always there to write about it. However, the authors and the people involved in, let's say, the Scott Peterson case were so voluminous that I just realized, you know what, I don't need to be covering this. I'll do something with this in a documentary. And I did, because I had my own show on the ID channel for 6 seasons. And I did an episode on Scott Peterson and was able to utilize all of my insights and connections with that particular story. But at that time, Fox News, Bill O'Reilly was their biggest star. And he had me on as his correspondent because it was very hard to get inside the courtroom. I was one of the few people who had a courtroom pass. And so that's kind of how that evolved in terms of me covering things for the media. I also covered the Michael Jackson trial for Fox and, yes, CNN. And I've been on all the networks, actually, Ashley. I mean, I've been on every network. You name it, I've done it.
You've had definitely a very impressive career. Now, when we first spoke about this case that you are covering in your book, Levi's Eyes, I told you that I hadn't heard of it. However, when I went to dive in, I actually have heard about this case before. And if any of you listening haven't heard about this case, the perpetrator behind the case, his name is Carl Carlson. It spans over years, and it's really incredible how much he got away with over some time. Can you tell us a brief synopsis about what your book is about regarding this case?
Sure. I'll say this. For anybody who's listening out there that is a true crime addict or fanatic or connoisseur, if you will. This case has been covered many places, in many formats. Dateline 2020. I've been on 2020 with it. I covered it in my own show, True Crime with Aphrodite Jones, years and years ago. And it seems like it's been exhausted. However, I will tell you that no, because in this case for this book, I had something very new for me after 30 years of writing, and that was unparalleled access to the killer. This particular killer, Carl Carlson, loves to talk, and he was calling me from his jail cell prior to the trial, which is unheard of. Criminals don't do that. They don't talk to media before their trial, but this guy did. And then during the trial, believe it or not, and all of the conversations I had with him were recorded. And then because of COVID, he was found guilty on March 17th, 2020. And obviously we all know what happened at that point. The world shut down. So, and by the way, he pretended that he had a fever that day so that he didn't have to sit in the courtroom and watch the impact statements of his own daughters. He killed their mother, he killed their brother, and he sniveled away in the holding cell, pretending that he might have COVID. This is the kind of guy this is. But in any event, because of that, he was not moved out of the San Andreas jail in California. That is where his first wife, Christina, was burned up in a house fire. It was considered an accident until 25 years later when his son died of an accident in New York, upstate New York. So it does span many years. And having this unfettered access to this killer allowed me to write this book through the eyes of the killer at times, not entirely, because I don't want to give him that much space, but there's a thread here that allows you to get into the mind of a psychopath like I've never done before. I mean, I had 2 years, Ashley, of unfettered access to this man. We spoke every day for an hour, 15-minute clips, because from a jail, that's what has to happen. And they're all recorded. And the comments and the life that he pretends to live and being able to get underneath his skin is really outrageous. I mean, again, I was at the BTK sentencing. I've been at the biggest trials, the biggest murder cases. I've met OJ Simpson at his Las Vegas trial. I've been through these ringers, and I can tell you that nothing is as outrageous as this particular man. This guy killed his biological son, who was 23 years old, and he dropped a truck on that young man. And he said he did it thinking that his son was still alive, but he walked away anyway because he, quote, freaked out. Well, your son's not alive when you dropped a 3-ton truck on your son's chest, number one. And number two, he after he copped a guilty plea to that and pled guilty to second-degree murder, reducing his sentence from life without to 15 years to life, he then, of course, says, I was hoodwinked. I should never have taken that plea. I didn't do this. He has proof. I mean, and that's the kind of thing we hear from every criminal. But the difference here is this man, Carl Carlson, killed his son, saying later in a confession to his second wife that, well, Levi had a good life anyway. He was married. He had kids. He lived a good life. In other words, he's rationalizing it. BTK, right? You don't rationalize it. You're somehow proud of your sick deeds, right? This guy, when he did admit it on tape to his wife in a recording, she wore a wire, second wife. He didn't know that he was being recorded. He didn't know that she was going to go to police, but he wanted to let her know because he thought they were going to get back together. They were in the midst of divorce. That I did. I dropped the truck on Levi, but it wasn't. I saw the opportunity once the truck fell. And he had a good life. He lived a good life. It's like, what?
Yeah, absolutely. So just to give a quick synopsis, his first murder was against his first wife in a house fire, correct? And then years later, he's then remarried and he then has his son. He kills his son.
Right. So the first murder was a house fire. And the interesting thing there is that he rescued his three children out of that house. So only his wife died. So when he left California, which by the way, he didn't go to her funeral, he didn't take his own children to his wife's funeral. He just hopped on a plane and left back to New York. And in those days, this happened in 1991. There wasn't the same ability to go back and forth across, with internets, with FaceTimes. None of that existed. Cell phones, barely existed at that time. So, he was able to kind of skip justice by getting to the other side of the country. The DA in California felt they didn't. It's a small county. It's Calaveras County, way up north in on the foothills of the Sierras, and that county didn't have the funding to let the investigators go to New York and re-interview this guy. He was gone, and he was heralded as a hero by the local papers in California because he saved his three children.
That's a shame.
And the thing about that is his wife that he eventually remarried, or his second, really what he wanted was a babysitter for his kids, by the way. She didn't realize it at the time. She thought he was really in love. He's a shapeshifter. But he convinced her, and it was easy to do, showing her the article, that he was a hero. And he went into the house and saved his three children. He walked through fire. He walked through burning house. The only problem with it is he didn't walk through fire.
Yeah.
he grabbed his kids out of there, and I believe it's because his son Levi saw something and got out on his own. Carl Carson then was obliged to go save his daughters.
I think one of the things that stuck out to me the most regarding that fire was the fact that there was wood paneling nailed to the window, which almost kind of implies to me that there was probably premeditation. I mean, in my opinion, there was absolutely premeditation regarding the murder of his first wife. And the fact that he would even put his children in that situation and then save them again, it makes a lot of sense that he felt obligated, probably because, somebody saw something.
Right, exactly. And, of course, the window was boarded up and with 17 nails, and it was plywood. And yes, he built a coffin for his wife to die in. That is what he did. He waited until she got in the bath. Her typical time to take a bath every day was 2:00. He waited while she was in a bathtub, naked, in a room, closed off, okay? And he lit that fire right outside that bathroom with his children still in the house and got out of there. She had no way to escape because she couldn't get through the window. He didn't try to get through the window, obviously. There was an axe right outside on the ground that was found by firefighters. The man had the tools. He could easily have rescued her. He did not want to rescue her because why? He had just taken out a $200,000 life insurance policy on her about 18, 19 days prior to the quote accident. And back then, if you can imagine, Ashley, that $200,000 would be like collecting $500,000 with inflation and today's prices 30 years later. So for him, who was struggling, he couldn't pay his bills, he was renting a house, he couldn't feed his family, he didn't know how to handle it. This was a way to solve all his problems.
Yeah. Can you tell me about how the insurance policies played a role in unraveling the case against Carl?
Sure. So what happened is this. He got away with the murder of Christina Carlson for 25 years. Actually, I take it back. It was 17 years later that Levi was killed. Levi had written a will on the day of his death, the morning that he was killed, that was notarized in a bank up in Seneca Falls, which is upstate New York, the Finger Lakes. And in that time period, he also wrote a handwritten will. Levi did. It's a couple, 3 sentences, and it was notarized. What did the will say? I leave all of my earthly assets to my father. Why did he do that? Well, because he was in the midst of a divorce, a very ugly divorce, Levi. He had two girls, little girls, Electra and Ivy. And he didn't want their mother to get a hold of the money because he knew their mother would spend it. So, and they were in this bitter divorce. So he trusted his father that his father would keep this money if there was an accident, if something happened to him, that he would keep it for his granddaughters, for the girls. And then of course the strange thing was that the policy was taken out for $300,000, which Levi didn't make that much money, but he did have a decent job, but didn't make that kind of money. And it had a $400,000 accident rider on it. So you have $700,000 to be collected if, quote, Levi has an accident. So, once that was discovered, believe it or not, nobody caught it because Levi was cremated, as was Christina. And there was nothing that happened at the, quote, crime scene. It was considered an accident. Police did nothing. Levi had died. Carl Carlson went through the whole fakery of feigning, this horror. He wasn't home at the time Levi died, allegedly, because he had gone to a funeral with his second wife. So he wasn't physically there, allegedly. But the truth is, he killed that young man. He killed his son before he left for the funeral and left his son there to die. And he admitted it. He admitted that he left him there to die. That it was because of that large insurance policy and because of the mysterious circumstances around Levi's death that his second wife, Cindy Carlson, not right away, because she doesn't want to think this way. She now has her own son with him. So there's 4 kids in the family, 3 that belong to Christina that she's raising, and they had their own son, a 4th, Alex. So in her mind, how can she reconcile this man that she's married to, that she's had a child with? She can't believe that he killed his first wife. She can't believe that he killed her stepson, Levi. She's completely in the dark about it, and she wants to be in the dark about it because who wants to admit this to themselves? It's such a dark thought. I know it crossed her mind. I spent a lot of time interviewing Cindy for this book. Her story has never been told. So that's something else again. And, she was sleeping next to a killer, knowing now that he was a killer, believing it, with a scissor under her bed and nunchucks because she had studied Taekwondo. She was scared for her life. And there's more to that story. But he was planning to kill Cindy as well.
Cindy, for those that are unfamiliar with the case, she was a big part of getting Carl behind bars, and she played along and played a big role in that. And I think that that's incredibly brave and says a lot about her character, that she's willing to continue to play along for the benefit of helping to get him.
I agree. I don't know that I would have been able to do it. I mean, but the thing is, and she has said this to me numerous times, when you're in that situation, you become what you need to become, because she's worried about her son, who could be next. She's worried about her granddaughters, Levi's daughters, because she discovers that he has taken life insurance policies out on his granddaughters. So she's thinking not just for herself, but for her son and for her granddaughters. The 2 stepdaughters were already out of the house. They were adults and grown and long gone. So in her mind, someone's going to be next. And she's got to figure out how to do this because the police had nothing. Nothing. They didn't have an adjudicated case in California. That had been deemed an accident and was a cold case that was gone for almost 30 years at that point. And they certainly had nothing on the Levi accident because it was wrapped up right on the scene by the local police. And then Levi was cremated. So where you get? What evidence are you getting? There's no evidence. The only way that he could have gotten trapped and caught and convicted or tried was if Cindy got a confession out of him. And that is what she decided she had to do.
Yeah. And it's incredible knowing that he's now taken 2 lives, that she was able to do that and able to keep up with that front. It's impressive. So I'm going to ask you the same question for both Cindy and Carl, but we'll start with Carl. Now, having exclusive access to Carl, and I know you mentioned that he just was a talker and he consistently wanted to talk to you. How, if at all, did that influence your opinion of the case or the narrative that you were writing?
So it influenced my narrative, not my opinion of the case. I mean, I had covered this right after Levi was killed, and after he was sentenced for taking the plea deal for a second-degree murder. So I had covered this on my show. I knew about this guy. I knew all about the story and all about I was waiting for that trial on Christina. I was waiting for that justice, just like the family was, from the time that I filmed that particular episode on my show in, I want to say it was 2013 or 14. And then I waited along with everyone else until 2020 to go to the trial in California. What was the question? Forget your question.
Oh, no worries at all. I was just curious if your interactions with Carl and Cindy, how they might have influenced the narrative of the story.
Right. So here's the thing. Because I spoke so much to Carl and also so much to Cindy, I got into their heads. And so there are many times, especially with Carl, not so much with Cindy, that I'm telling the story from his viewpoint. Because again, he's so outrageous, you can't believe that this is his viewpoint. You just can't believe it. So I mean, with all the tapes I have, and he always gave me permission to tape and use it for the book. I do utilize quotes, but I also have a sense of the narrative being from him at times because he's stuck into my brain and I know how he thinks. And I want readers to know and people to know and have the opportunity to see how a psychopath actually thinks. Because, they think they're normal.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
They don't think they're a psychopath. They're normal. And anything they did in the past, if the car blew up, which one of his cars went on fire, that didn't happen. What are you talking about? Oh, no, I lost money on that car. I lost money on my farm, my barn. This happened. That, I'm just unlucky. And it's not only that. It's that he forgets, and he's such a pathological liar that he can take you around in so many circles. And by the end of it, you don't know what ends up. And Cindy experienced that because she's the wife, and she doesn't want to believe that she's married to a killer. And he's able to bamboozle her for about 4 years. 2008. She started investigating in 2011. So count it up. What is it, 9, 10, 11, 3 years that she was bamboozled by this monster. And slowly but surely, she starts to realize, oh my God, did he do this? Did he do this? And then she starts to put the pieces together. And now she's realizing she's living with a killer.
Yeah, that's actually something that I talk about a lot on my podcast, not necessarily with somebody that's been living with somebody that's been diagnosed as a psychopath or a killer, but I do try to emphasize a lot with narcissistic relationships or domestic abuse that oftentimes it's easy for people to look from the outside in. How did you not know that this person was like this, or why didn't you leave? And it's very easy to victim blame in scenarios like this, but however, there's always a pattern of abuse where there's love bombing and manipulation. So I have no doubt in my mind that Carl turned up the charm and drew her right in, and she had no idea what was going on until it hit her head on, and then she realized she had to face it.
Right. And you're absolutely right. That's a very astute point that you make, Ashley. And, people do think, like, for example, the Gilgo Beach serial killer on Long Island, was finally caught. Well, he was living in a house in a perfectly good neighborhood. I went to the house. I saw it. I did some man on the street interviews there. Neighbors had no idea. They didn't really know him. He was a loner. But the interesting thing was his wife is there, did not know. She asked for divorce after he was caught. She did not know. And people are like, yeah, she must have known something. She must have seen something. Well, I covered the BTK as well. And Dennis Rader had a wife and children who did not know. They didn't know. And so, you really, in films, TV and movie land, the people who live with the killer, they start to realize and they know and they're scared. Well, in real life, not so much. If you've got a good, true psychopath on your hands, and they're able to then utilize, like you say, charms, and also, they're able to hit your hot spots. and they know what will be your triggers. So they're able to manipulate you in ways that keep you distracted from anything you might other be thinking, and that's another ploy of Carl's. He constantly withheld money from Cindy. He constantly was playing games with the money from Levi's insurance policy. And then he was blaming it all on Cindy to his girls when his daughters came and visited him in jail. Oh, Cindy spent all the money. No, Cindy barely touched the money. Cindy was afraid for his life. She took some money so she could survive. And the really unfortunate thing about this, Ashley, is that her stepdaughters, as well as Christina's family and others, blame Cindy. She's the hero in this thing. But these people have made her into the villain, which again is something I explore in the book, which is another facet of human psychology when people don't want to face, the truth. It's bizarre. I mean, they know that Carl killed Levi. They know Carl killed Christina. They know it. But yet all they're concerned about as of the last number of years is Cindy took part of that money that was Levi's and she needs to pay it back. Well, Cindy took part of the money because she had to survive, because she was on the run, because a killer was after her, because she needed to raise her own son and save him from being killed. How about that?
Yeah, I think a lot of times it's easier for people to believe what they know not to be true if it means it's a more comfortable reality than the alternative. So them facing the realization that their father has committed not one, but two murders is a lot more difficult than to just place the blame on their stepmother who was just trying to make it out of this.
Exactly. And that's very well put. Very well said.
Now, if you're able to share, what was the most surprising detail that you uncovered during your research on the case?
Well, there are so many. Surprising. What was surprising to me is that Carl, while in the trial, was calling me. Now, remember, I'm there in the courtroom, all right? When I leave the courtroom, he's calling me on my cell phone. And he's commenting about the various testimony of the day. Now, this is virtually unheard of. I can't imagine anybody on trial for his life, which he was, not only believing that he's innocent, thinking that he's going to convince the jury of this, but that he is calling me, who's media. I'm media. Okay. To talk to me about, because we've gotten so close by then. So he's my buddy. And so he starts telling me, did you see that juror? What scraggly hair she had? What kind of hillbillies are these people anyway? I mean, what? I had this all on tape. So things like that, to me, were quite shocking. He also was raising ducks. And that was what he did with Levi's money. He started a duck business. And he thought he was going to be the king of the world and sell gourmet ducks to New York City restaurants, which he did do initially. Unfortunately, he doesn't know how to run a business and he ran it into the ground. But when it ran into the ground, one of the things that happened was he couldn't afford to feed the ducks anymore. So he killed them all himself. And he thought that was okay. Hand by inch. He didn't gas them. He didn't pull a car in there and use carbon monoxide. No. He broke each one of their necks one by one.
Yeah. Sadly, I'm not surprised just based on, and I don't want to give it away, but based on what happened with his barn that he had, animal cruelty, I feel like is something that isn't foreign to him. But it's really disturbing to think about somebody that has absolutely zero regard for human life, animal life, just zero regard for anybody but themselves. It's a really chilling thought.
It is. And what's even more chilling is the fact that he was able to mask this to everybody and have a whole second family with Cindy Best for years. They were married for 18 years. So he was able to mask what he did in California in 1991, on New Year's Day of 1991. and get remarried and start a new life with a new son and a whole blended family and the wedding and the whole 9 yards with the matching dresses for the girls and all of it, and continue on until he decided, you know what, I need some more money. And when Levi is 23 years old, he decides, this is going to be my ticket to the rainbow, my son.
Yeah, that's something I'll never be able to understand. Really, just I can't understand murder at all, but it really kind of takes my mind to a very much darker place when I think about a parent killing their child. It's just something that I'll never be able to rationalize in my mind.
That's exactly right. I mean, there are cases, many cases where somebody just snaps. They've been abused, they've been cheated on, they've been whatever it is, and they snap. And it's a crime of passion or revenge. But when you have a premeditated act, which is thought out weeks and months in advance, which is leading up to something, okay, that is a whole different ball of wax. That's not even, you can't even categorize this person into, he's not a serial killer, so he's not killing just arbitrarily, right? He's not somebody who snapped in a relationship. He's not in self-defense or in any kind of, passion. He is just a cold-blooded, stone cold killer.
Now, I don't know if this is something that's been released or if something that I can ask or if you're sure, but I've recently been doing a lot of research on narcissism and the different types of narcissism. And I've been doing a lot of research on malignant narcissism, which you often see with sociopathy and psychopathy. Do you know if he has been formally diagnosed with psychopathy and if there's also a diagnosis of narcissism accompanied with that, maybe malignant narcissism?
He was never diagnosed with it, but I can tell you that he absolutely fits every single element of what is a sociopath or psychopath. I mean, every single element, he checks the box. But of course, he did not want to be evaluated mentally. His attorney in Levi's sentencing wanted him to be evaluated, and I don't believe he would allow it. He's not crazy. Everybody else is crazy. It's all about blaming the victim. It's all about not taking responsibility. It's all about self-aggrandizement. These are the elements that are part of a narcissist, that are part of the psychopathy of Carlson and others that, unfortunately, there are others that do this, not to their children, though. I tell you, I had a television station fly in here from Japan to do interviews with myself and Cindy on this subject. And it was like, wow, I have people all over the world. When I wrote my Michael Jackson book, I understand that. But why was this? And the reason is because there's just so few cases of somebody who kills their own biological child for money. I mean, it just doesn't happen.
I feel like, we've obviously heard cases where, particularly with women that are experiencing severe postpartum depression, but to hear about cases of people that are killing their children just to benefit themselves for money or some other purpose is just something that seems very foreign to us. And I think that's probably a good thing. But when we do come across these cases, it's really sobering to think about somebody that makes this conscious choice to kill their child after killing their mother and letting them live with that for so many years.
And there are some other bits and pieces that nobody knows about that are in this book that are pieces to the puzzle, but also in a way envelop another mystery within this between Levi and his father that is almost undescribable. It's unexplainable, frankly. I'm not going to give it away, but there's a weird relationship that goes on there, and there's proof of it. And again, that's something, it's hard to figure out what exactly transpired between these two, because think about it. He had to get Levi under that truck on the same day that Levi just signed over a will and take out an insurance policy weeks before. What would have made Levi do that if Levi believed that Carl killed his mother? Why would he have put himself in that vulnerable position, do you think? Not like he was over there working on the cars every week or ever. He had never been over there to work on a car at the farm. So, there are numerous curiosities in this story that I tried to reveal as if you're unpeeling an onion, and the layers are deep.
Yeah, absolutely. It seems like a very complicated case with a lot of different moving pieces. Now, how do you approach balancing factual reporting with storytelling in a genre like true crime?
I've always approached it um, as a narrator, an omniscient narrator, telling the story um, without a particular point of view and doing as much as I can to incorporate whomever is involved in the story. I interviewed the police in this case. I interviewed, family members, Carl's brother, not just Cindy Carlson. I also interviewed Alex Carlson, who's nobody's talked to. That's the son that Cindy had with Carl. Of course, Carl. I've interviewed the experts, the fire experts, you name it. The lawyers, the defense attorneys. I get very involved with all of that and include it within the story. But at the end of the day, I am telling a story. And in order to do that, I have to use novelistic techniques. And one of those techniques that's very important to me is to reimagine dialogue. And I do that by doing the interview, finding out what that person said, what was said between Carl and Cindy, for example, to convince her to marry him or to convince her that he's this wonderful guy. And I can then utilize her having been there to recreate that so that the reader feels they're reading a novel at the same time that they're then getting quotes from the actual people so that it verifies or corroborates what you're seeing in the novelistic format. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I think that hits the nail on the head. And that's something that, even though I host a podcast, it's something that I try to do as well. I've tried to really focus on the people that are involved in a victim-centered focus and a research focused manner. I think a lot of times in the genre today, you'll see a lot of sensationalizing things. And so I appreciate that you really focus on reporting the facts and giving the people that are involved, that are the victims, a point of view and give them a voice rather than sensationalizing it from the perpetrator's perspective.
Yes. And again, that is something here where when I say you hear from the killer himself in this book, you don't hear good stuff. I'm not aggrandizing this guy. He is the monster of all monsters, but his perspective is a way to gain insight into a psychopath. But do I want to allow him to be aggrandized? No, 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 no. And yes, the victims are way more important to me. They always are more important. They're the most important thing. But at the same time, because I've been in this for so long, you have to realize I understand how important it is to try to get inside the mind of a killer. So all of my books have that element, For example, the first one I wrote about the FBI agent, I confronted that agent on live television. And he tried to pretend that this was an accident, and I just went after him. That's part of what I do, and it's always been what I do. I mean, I've had some sessions with killers in prisons where I'm sitting in what would be a lawyer's confidential room, a glass box, and I had one almost reach over the table because he did not like that I was going after him. So, there are elements to what I do that can be scary, and but yet at the same time, I have to go there in order to tell the whole story.
As a veteran true crime author, how have you seen the genre evolve, not just in true crime novels, but especially considering podcasting and streaming services and how popular they are today?
It's interesting to me that people have become so obsessed with true crime, fascinated by true crime. Um, I, I can say this. Back when I started writing, the true crime section in a bookstore is minuscule. You couldn't even find it. People really didn't seem to care. It was the OJ Simpson case that started things, a different aspect to all of this. People wanted to know about OJ Simpson. But now with the podcast it's the amount of podcasts, the amount of emphasis on true crime today, these days, it's overwhelming. And I think the reason people want to see this is because they're curious about the bizarre elements of human behavior. They're curious about whether or not they should be rethinking who they know in their own lives. But more than anything, they want to know that I'm safe. These people may not have been safe, but I'm safe. It's kind of like when you drive by an accident and people stop and you think they're ghouls. Really what people are thinking is, oh my God, that's so horrible. Thank God it's not me, And that's a big piece of why I think people are so embroiled in looking at and sussing out true crime stories.
Piggybacking off of that, what role do you think that true crime literature plays in society today, especially with cases that are similar to this one?
I can speak for myself, and my philosophy has been from the beginning that I started this 30 years ago is that I will only tell a story that's going to help this world somehow be a safer place, to allow us to see ourselves in these characters, to understand that there are people who slipped through the cracks that perhaps would not have gone the wrong way had they been, caught by a teacher or a parent or a neighbor or a cousin along the way. So there's that. Then there are, of course, the warnings of victims. Why is it that victims refuse or don't see what's coming their way or don't? So there's all of that in my books, I definitely want as a thread throughout what I'm writing. As far as how it plays in today, I will tell you this. I'm focused right now on schoolhouse shootings, and I have been for some time. I wrote 2 books that involve teen crimes. One is called Cruel Sacrifice. The other is called The Embrace. And when I wrote them many years ago, schoolhouse shootings were non-existent when I wrote Cruel Sacrifice and very, very few and far between when I wrote The Embrace. Now it's an everyday thing. And we almost feel, I don't know, that this is nothing we can do something about. I think there's something we can do about this. And I've been working for many years now on having people do videos on their own school campuses to try to figure out what people can do, what are people thinking, but more than that, to try to get to the root cause of why this is happening. And, to me, that's one of the most important things that anybody in true crime could do today is try to not only figure it out, but do something about it. And, it's not easy. And that's why nobody's been able to do anything about it. But we do have, there are closed doors now at schools. There are locked doors at schools. There are, provisions that are made. I see at concerts, et cetera, with metal detectors. There are some things in place, but it doesn't stop these horrific school shootings.
How do you decompress or detach emotionally when you're deep into researching and writing about subjects like this that obviously get very dark?
When I was writing Cruel Sacrifice, which is one of the most horrific tales of violence ever, if anyone reads it, they will know why I say that. I got so embroiled with that case that I couldn't sleep at night. And I was up nights and I was up days, and I was so twisted into what happened that I realized I had lost myself. And it was then when I was writing that book in 1992 that I said, okay, this is it. I'm going to have 2 lives. 5 o'clock, no more writing. And weekends, no writing. That's it. So I turn it off at 5 o'clock and on weekends, and I go into a completely different world. The world of going boating, the world of taking trails, hikes, whatever it is I want to do. And making sure that I experience as much fun as I can possibly experience, because I cannot carry this on my shoulders morning, noon, and night. I would just drown in it. And I was drowning in it when I wrote Cruel Sacrifice. So I had to figure out a way to save myself. And that's kind of what I figured out. And it has worked for me.
So, Aphrodite, as we wrap up, if there's one thing you wish every reader, or in my case, listener, could understand or appreciate about the world of true crime, what would that be?
Wow, that's a great question. I think people should not look at these stories as entertainment. And I wish that people would understand that this is infotainment, if you will, that there are messages here. There are messages that we need to take and utilize to try to make this world a safer place. Whether it be somebody you know who's a victim of domestic violence and you're not doing anything about it, or they're not doing anything about it. There's ways to prevent violence. And we need to focus on that, because just being entertained by a crime story is just not enough. It's wrong in a way. And I shudder when I think that, and I think of that. And but again, I don't think it should be considered entertainment. I think people need to think long and hard about why these things happen and what it is they're watching or listening to involving a true crime case.
I agree with you 100%. One of the things that I often say when I'm recording episodes is, it's understandable that humans have a morbid curiosity. But if we're going to consume true crime content, we need to do it in a responsible way. And we need to understand that these aren't stories for our entertainment. These are real things that happen to people, mothers, daughters, sons, brothers. These are real events that happen, and it's not just to entertain us. So I really appreciate that you take that perspective.
Thank you. Well, it's really the only one to take.
If you are interested in learning more about the crimes of Carl Carlson, Aphrodite Jones's book, Levi's Eyes, will be out on Wednesday, September 27th, 2023. If you liked what you heard today, please rate, review, subscribe. You can find me on social media at fthatpod, except for Instagram, which is fthat_pod. Don't forget to check out the website, fthatpod.com, and subscribe to the Patreon channel for exclusive content, ad-free episodes, archived episodes, and bonus episodes.